o'clock, and I guess we have a forum, so.
I did hear from Miranda. She didn't end up needing a ride, but she is here shortly.
Okay, well, when she gets here, she gets here.
She can join.
Meeting starts at 8.
All right, good morning. So the Marine Advisory Board meeting called to order, June 8th. Welcome, everybody. Might take a second to maybe just introduce everybody again, make sure we know who we all are. Steve?
Steve Voris.
Right.
Kevin Laughlin.
Mike Roman.
Wade Carlisle.
Dana Stanley.
Julie Battaglia.
Bill Henderson.
Good. And of course, Eric and Mike, right, thank you. So first item on the agenda
Some
is,
people may not have met Eric.
well, he's on the agenda to be introduced, so.
Oh!
Yeah. But hi, Eric. Don't mean to slight you.
I did read that.
That's all right. Since we
Don't
had
hear
a
enough
formal,
about me.
since we had a formal minute item, I figured we should get to that eventually. In any event, first thing I guess is to take a look at the minutes from the last meeting, which Patricia seemed to do a great job of capturing all that discussion from our meeting 3 months ago. Nice work.
Very concise.
Yes, yeah, that was terrific. Any comments on the minutes? Can we have a motion to accept the minutes from the last meeting?
I'd like to make a motion that we accept the minutes from last month's meeting.
Thank you. Seconded?
Second.
Okay, duly noted. And with that, does everyone approve?
Approved.
Yes.
Great. So I think we're all set with the minutes from the last meeting. Second item is citizens to be heard regarding items not on the agenda. Looks like, I guess we don't have anyone for that purpose this morning. So move on. Okay, so first thing is the new business items, and lo and behold, we have the introduction of the new Marine and Aviation Director.
So I won't need notes for this one. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here this morning. My name is Eric Gandy. I just wanted to take an opportunity to thank you for your service on the board. It's important for guys like me to get input, and I think it's critical to have those levels of communication throughout the community, and the boards are a part of that. So a little bit about myself. Third generation Floridian. My family's been here and in St. Pete since I think about 1910, 1915, something like that. I grew up around the area, and grew up in Tampa, and spent the last 30 and a half years with Clearwater PD before retiring as the deputy chief. During my time at the PD, I served a bunch of different roles. I was at one time the beach district commander for several years. I established the Marine unit for the police department to include acquiring the vessel, establishing policy, training, selection of crew, things of that nature. And I think the reason the former chief selected me for that position was some of my experience in the marine industry, if you will. So as a young cop, I got a OUPV and used to run charters now and again on my downtime. So I had some local experience with the area, a lot of marine experience. I used to work for a yacht maintenance company through college, did some things like that. As far as the aviation background, also kind of interesting. My dad was an aerial photography pilot over in Tampa, and I used to fly a lot of his stuff when I was in high school, late high school, and early college. So I was a very high-time VFR only pilot, simply because that's all we did, clear weather photography. But I spent a lot of time doing that, and those two things led me to kind of pursue an interest in this environment, and I always knew that I would be doing something in the marine or aviation field upon retirement, and it just was a timing situation, and here I am. So, my background at the PD is besides starting the Marine unit and being involved in Clearwater Beach and spending quite a bit of time negotiating competing interests out there. I was the SWAT team commander for about 5 years, spent 10 total years on SWAT. I was the patrol division commander, the emergency response team commander, ran the canine teams, and actually worked a couple of dogs. And I ended up gravitating or finding myself in charge of a lot of high liability assignments. So for me, I think that had me well prepared to step into this role because it is challenging. I think when I stepped in, I found that Ed had done a lot of really good things in terms of trying to address some legacy issues that the department has had with always doing things a certain way. I think he and Mike did a really good job of addressing some significant challenges because the city was different 20 years ago, and the department was different, and they had the Marina on the beach, and beyond that, the air park, and it was administered through a lease and some other ancillary facilities. But now we have the harbor marina, which is in and of itself a significant challenge. So, someone asked me the other day, is it as stressful as being the deputy chief or a SWAT commander? I said, it's a different type of stress. We are essentially landlords with about 400 or so tenants. And we deal with all things that revolve around tenants and competing interests and the physical plant and all those things. So it's a different level, but there's no decision that I've been involved in thus far that's some sort of a life-altering consequence. So from that level, it's a different type of stress, but we've got a lot of irons in the fire. You'll probably see me more before council in the near future. Just because of some of the projects. As you know, we have the redevelopment project of the docks at the beach marina. I was just before council for an emergency repair of the wave attenuators, which you guys were aware of. And you'll see it as well because it's one of our ancillary responsibilities. The air park lease is due, and we're working through an RFP process there. So quite busy right now, and I'm actually pursuing additional personnel for the department as well. Just based on my initial 2.5-month assessment of operational needs. So it's a steep learning curve. I've used this analogy several times of at base camp looking at the top of Everest right now and just trying to get as much information as I can. So I'm having a lot of conversations with folks, and I'm hopeful that through these interactions I get even more input. So thank you.
Eric, I'm curious, how do you find your time split between the two responsibilities, either of which is fairly large?
So this guy behind me is an extremely heavy lifter, probably literally and figuratively. Mike has the depth of knowledge that's irreplaceable for these operations. But I quickly realized, he's wearing way too many hats. So it's very difficult because of those competing interests. So there's not a day that goes by that we don't get 15, 20 phone calls, issues, challenges, while we're trying to manage big projects. So I'm working on those from the staffing perspective with the city.
Okay. Thank you. Welcome. That's great. So next item on the agenda is a review of the update on Marina rules. I'm not sure what that was.
I'll need my notes for that one.
Okay. Eric's doing that one.
It won't take long. I just want to discuss a few things. So whenever I've been involved in taking over a team or a project, I spend a little bit of time initially just trying to get my arms around it and figuring out the flow, how things work. I'm very conscientious about liability and exposure, obviously, based on my previous roles. And I think that, I looked at some of our rules and some of the requests for dock permits, if you will, and we reviewed everything we had on file. So our staff went through and tried to ascertain who was in compliance with the rules. Annual insurance updates, registrations, insurance, critical, particularly before hurricane season, and we were probably 60% non-compliant in terms of people submitting what they're obligated to submit regularly. So, I think our commercial tenants are more compliant. Sometimes we have, rec tenants that are out of state or whatever. So we understand that. So we sent several notices out, and I've tried to address some things that were problematic for us. The rules being one of them. And, even upon sending out communications vis-a-vis email and notifications, we're still getting a level of non-compliance that's really not satisfactory. So I'm going to end up sending out a follow-up letter in some circumstances. I don't like to take a blanket approach and just throw it out to everybody again. Once we send the notices out, then we'll follow up with individual notices. It's a lot more work for my staff, but I think that's the right way to do it. Because then the folks that did comply aren't like, well, wait a minute, why are you sending me this again? So insurance is just one example. I'm in the process of changing some of our rules and agreements so that the city, from this point forward, will be an interested party in the insurance policy. Therefore, the insurance company communicates with us directly when the policy lapses or it's renewed. So then we don't have to go chasing folks around to try and obtain this information. It just makes sense. I mean, I've had my best one several marinas over the years, and ultimately I've always had to list the entity as an interested party. Just kind of usual and customary. But like I said, I'm looking back at things that have been done the same way for generations, essentially. So that's just one example. Another one that I quickly realized was significantly problematic at the main marina is U.S. mail delivery. We were inundated with thousands and thousands of pieces of mail, some legitimate mail and some junk mail. As we all know, for every piece of mail you're looking for, you get 10 pieces of junk mail. So what was happening is many tenants were and the commercial tenants had historically been allowed to do this, use the office as a mailing address for their business, because some had no other mechanism. Again, this is legacy stuff that I'm dealing with. And so our staff was sorting through thousands of pieces of mail to try and find our own mail and then figure out who it belonged to. So I sent several notices out indicating that I talked to the post office, looked at some different strategies to address that, tried to even ask if we could put like a cluster mailbox out there with slips on it. Well, they don't recognize a slip as an address, so that was a non-starter. So, that was part of the rule change we made. We can't accept mail in packages anymore. It's just too cumbersome and too much of a liability, because sure enough, someone's going to call in and say, well, someone sent me $500 in cash, where is it? So I could foresee that, and we were getting GPS head units and expensive pieces of equipment. Staff even told me someone got multiple toilets delivered. So we just can't manage that. It's just inconsistent with what our day jobs are. So that's another rule change that was made relatively quickly, and notices were sent out. So I've had those conversations with folks too. I know, it's a change, and some people will have to either establish a P.O. box or have the mail sent to their own residence. We've made one exception, and that's for the transient vessels that are on a journey somewhere. If they make prior arrangements with us, is the only circumstance we can really do that. So I think we've worked through that. I got several complaints, and I tried to articulate, as I'm doing to you, why we can't be sorting thousands of pieces of mail. The other thing, we have a couple other rule related issues that I'm trying to address. So I'm going to go sit down with legal and go through all of them to make sure that we have the best set of rules possible for all of our tenants that make sense, that aren't overly burdensome for any group of folks, and also insulate us from potential challenges. I also we had an unfortunate incident recently where a vessel had a couple collisions in the marina. The Coast Guard got involved, a commercial vessel. And I can't really go into the details of the case. It's their investigation, other than to say that when we started reviewing files, we determined that licenses and documentation weren't supplied regularly. So that's another change I'm going to make to the commercial tenant agreements, that I've got to have the proper licenses and endorsements and inspections. The commercial vessels are a little bit different, as you might know, levels of inspection and documentation and things like that. So I just want to make sure that the operators of those vessels are actually qualified to operate them, and that we have a record of that.
This was at the beach marina.
Yes, yes. So that's just kind of a quick overview of just some of the salient points that I'm trying to address. It'll take a little bit of time and sit down with legal to make sure we've got things covered in the manner we want to. I just want to see if I've got anything else in there that I wanted to bring up. There's some other legacy stuff. We already had to deal with this. We got a complaint from one of the commercial tenants that went to the mayor's office and then to the fire marshal about fueling of personal watercraft. So some of the operators have personal watercraft operations out there at the main marina, or beach marina. And so it was a bit of a conflict. They were storing some fuels in trucks, pickup trucks on the property, and it was inconsistent with what the fire marshal had agreed to back in 2013. The reason they're allowed to fuel remotely or with approved containers at their vessels is because of the frequency with which they fuel and the fact that when they try and fuel at our fuel docks, they're spilling gas all over the place because of the wave action and the instability of jet skis. So Mike has already recognized and addressed that as part of the marina rebuild to have designated area and cradles for the jet skis to fuel at our fuel docks going forward. So we met with everybody because the jet ski operators then complained back to the mayor's office about the challenges that this, or the constraints this involved. So we met with the fire marshal, met with the operators and resolved that. So that's going to have to be addressed in the rules because it's legacy stuff back to the 2013 rule. Oh, there's one more thing that struck me as funny. I think it was lost and found or lost property. So, lost and found property, and again, archaic language, you know, we're going to maintain it, and then whoever turned it in got to file a claim and keep it. Well, that is codified in Florida law, but we aren't the repository for lost and found property. We'll be turning that over or having individual who finds it turn it over to the proper authority, which is the police department. So again, our staff shouldn't be handling, maintaining, storing something until someone files a finder's claim. But this again goes way back. You know, someone drops a driver's license in the foyer, we'll pick it up and hang on to it for the day, but then ultimately we're going to have to turn it over to the PD. So just a few things that you know, to me were kind of liability problems for us and legacy issues that some of the stuff just needs freshening up and a new set of eyes on it. And I think we've got a good legal advisor and we've been working with him and sharing ideas, so we'll ultimately sit down in between project planning meetings and emergency repairs to you know, codify these things and then publish them. One of my intents also is, you know, some of the things in these agreements are specified, rate increases, you know, a couple days notice. My intent going forward is to provide ample notice on these things. 30-day lead time for any kind of substantive changes, unless it's an emergency change we have to make. I think that's the right thing to do, even though, you know, legally we, or per our agreements, we're allowed to give a, you know, 72-hour notice. I think going forward, I want to make sure that everyone has 30 days to adjust to, and so in line with that, you know, my intent would be to have this meeting at a time where we can discuss those potential increases, hammer those out, get a recommendation that I can take to the city manager in a timely manner that then the tenants have 30 days to adjust or adapt. So those just a few things, and like I said, that's kind of the 30,000-foot view, but there's a lot of nuances to this stuff that I think just need to be addressed. Anybody have any questions? Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Eric.
Yeah, I think I'll stay there. I got to bring another notebook up.
Right, because we're going to move on to old business items. And now we'll talk about an update on the beach marina replacement project.
So yes, I do have old business. If you want to do old business first, or
Another old business item?
yeah, I got an old business item for you.
We'll ordinarily take it later, but in honor of your presence here today, let's do it first. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. No, I just heard you mention old business, and I thought perhaps you want to do it first. I can. Let me do the beach marina project
Okay,
first,
fine.
and then I'll talk about the old business. So we've had regular meetings with the engineering design team regarding the Beach Marina project. I came into this, and I think I was in a week, maybe 2 weeks. In the first meeting, we discussed the budget and where we are in the potential costs related to this project. It was significantly over what we had anticipated. I mean, certainly we're under an unusual inflationary environment now. And this was, approaching the 30% design phase. So we met with them and discussed some of those things, and I'll just go over a couple of them with you. I would put this there, but I don't know that you'll be able to see it effectively. It's really small font engineering.
I can move it up.
So, for full disclosure, these are what we're working with. If you look at the total redevelopment cost down at the bottom, you look at the funding sources we are utilizing or potentially utilizing to fund this. And if you look at the bottom line, of course, when you see, what we're putting into it between the penny money, our own marina revenue, we come up with a deficit. And that deficit, the majority of it, there's some scope changes that have created some of that, and that was the attempt to facilitate the city's vision while trying to make sure we accommodated the commercial tenants. Our goal is to make sure that no commercial tenant loses a slip at the marina. And the design team has worked really hard to ensure that. That was essentially a requirement of this, is that we need to preserve that commercial fleet. And again, I go back to my history here. I'm an old Floridian. I'm used to working waterfronts. Remember my dad complaining about there being 5 million people in the state of Florida. So the working waterfronts have gone the way of the condo over the years. And, for us in the city, it's critical to preserve that. So some of the costs associated with this project, the cost increases, are trying to make sure we accommodate as best as we can the commercial tenants and make sure none of them lose a slip at that marina. And I think they've done a good job of an understanding that was critical. Because truly, in my view, that component is something that allows people to recognize Clearwater and recognize, what that marina is. That being said, so that increased, some of the costs associated with this project. There are also some scope changes over the years. To include dredging, the individual kiosks for each operation. So what happens now is that the commercial tenants have, for lack of a better term, small offices, kiosks, points of sale that they operate out of. So if the vessel's out, they can leave a staff member there and they can still book trips, which makes sense. So in an effort to try and address that need, they put in a plan for upland small kiosks for the commercial operations. So that was an additional scope factor, and some are the city's vision for the aesthetic component and sort of a promenade approach to that facility to interconnect it with Beach Walk. So that was kind of and I wasn't here for that, but I'm kind of referring historically to what the vision was, the city's vision for this. Maintain the commercial fleet, but integrate this with Beach Walk so that the visiting public has kind of an uninterrupted flow around the marina and then access to those commercial entities. So some of those things have increased the cost. The dredging was an addition to the scope, and so those are some of the reasons, plus inflation and contingency, that have added to this cost. So I met with the city manager to discuss this, and ultimately he asked that we pursue some phased plans or phased approaches to this marina build to see if we can get within, our budget. I've got several of them. They're a work in progress, and they do. For instance, one of them eliminates an entire recreational dock and 40 slips and the revenue associated with those. And we're going to meet a meeting with him again on the 14th. We're going to have additional conversations about that because, I'm just not sure. Do I lose the revenue for a period of time and then attempt to rebuild something like that? But we have several other approaches to this that we're going to discuss and discuss the consultant engineering team's presentation to council at 30%. So I'm going to have those conversations with the CM on the 14th, I believe. So I have more clarity there and look at the plans. None of them are great. They're all takeaways, of course. When you try and get within the budget, you have to lose something. There's no way around that. So we have to just look at what makes the most sense. It became clear to me in researching this project that it's complicated. It's very complicated. The underground utilities, the age of the seawall, the docks were from the 80s, and they give you about a 20-year useful lifespan on a timber frame dock. So I walk them with regularity, and I know what shape they're in. And I know sometimes we talk about rates and market rates. I can't charge market rate at that facility based on the condition it's in. And I would invite any one of you to come pay us a visit and take a walk through there, or just do it on your own volition and see what we're dealing with. So it's a complicated problem. It's a complicated engineering feat. We met with Duke Energy the other day to have some conversations about the service out there. We have issues there. And I think that the design team is working really hard and putting a lot of time and effort into to accommodate everybody's needs. I will tell you that just a personal observation, because they have to resolve the seawall issues. The seawall is a phase 1 fix because it needs a permanent replacement at some point in the future. There's no way around that. So a lot of their design involves planning for an eventual seaward replacement of the existing seawall. So that's what makes some of it complicated and limits their ability to do certain things, like a fixed timber dock structure for all commercial tenants. Because then you would just have to tear that out and with all the associated costs. And what I'm finding, I've had lots of conversations with commercial tenants, and everyone has a different need. When I went into this, I kind of approached it, I approached it as if they were sort of all unified in their approach and view of what this should look like or could look like. I found that individual tenants have individual needs, and to the extreme sometimes that people are saying, well, I've got a business plan that involves this, can you accommodate it? And my response is simply, no, I can't build a single slip around a potential business model because funding may fall through, you may have a change of plans. There's some things there that don't allow us to do that and would make the cost really exorbitant to address the commercial slips. So it's a challenge. It's definitely has kept me up at night thus far, just trying to recognize I want to allow the commercial folks to maintain, their business operations, and recognizing that current code, current requirements, once we address this structure, won't allow for some of the amenities that currently exist. There's no way around it. And I use the Seminole Docks example regularly because the city's not exempt from our own code, our county code. We have to comply. And the Seminole Docks bathroom are a prime example of that level of compliance. For years, you needed 2 decent bathrooms at Seminole Docks. Everyone, myself included, thought, well, just build a couple bathrooms for a couple $100,000, right? It makes sense. We've got a $1.2, $1.3 million bathroom in the sky because it had to be built above the floodplain. It had to be ADA compliant, and because of the height, the ramps were inconsistent with ADA needs, so they had to put an elevator in it. So now you've got this monstrosity at Seminole Docks that costs ungodly amounts of money. And I think those are the things that, those are the things to me that are challenging, because I recognize that, my number one goal is to maintain that commercial fleet and make sure no one loses the ability to operate out of there. And, so that's critically important. And at the same time, make sure we update that facility so we can be proud of it, and most importantly, it's safe and functions well. So those are the kind of the three competing interests that sometimes are mutually exclusive, if you will. To address certain things, I have to take away certain things. And the permitting and what's allowable now is a lot different than it was in the 80s, as you guys might suspect. Hurricane code, floodplain adjustments, all those things are impactful to these projects. And I think, look no further than Seminole Docks and see what you get. So, that's it in a nutshell. We are still, like I said, we went through an exercise with the design team to come up with some alternative phased projects that try and get us within that 20,800,000 number. There's still some unknowns in that, in terms of dredging. We've had some dredging reports, and it's not some nice stuff you can pump up on a beach somewhere. We have to handle that sediment and carefully, and we're working on that. So those costs could increase based on what we're pulling out of there. Is it contaminated? Isn't it? All those types of things could have additional impacts.
They could need part of the parking lot and a further loss of parking revenue while that goes on too, or?
So I will tell you, if you look at fiscal year 24 Marina revenue, I'm fearful, and speaking of revenue, I'm a little fearful. There's no phased approach to this that doesn't have us vacating portions of that marina. The goal is to allow the commercial tenants to retain their ability to operate within there. And that would, unfortunately, be on the backs of some of the recreational tenants that would have to be displaced. I used this example yesterday, and I've used it a couple times. This is no different than having an old trailer park, and now we're going to put condos there. There's going to be displacement. And you'll learn something about me relatively quickly. I try and shoot everybody straight. I will tell you what I know. I will tell you what I believe to be possible and what's not possible. There was a lot of discussion about mooring fields and allowing people to. There's not an ordinance to allow for mooring fields, nor do I think DEP would allow us to drop chunks of concrete all over the sea bottom out there and tie boats up to it. I mean, we already have that problem with the derelict vessels and the illegally moored vessels. So that's not, not within the realm of possibility. We've talked to some other marina operators around the state, and we might see a 50% reduction in the fleet that can stay there or more during this period. So that's a management problem we're going to have to deal with. And again, like I said in my introduction, we're essentially landlords with hundreds of tenants, and they all have different needs and the ability to relocate. So again, those are the things that keep guys like me up at night, because what do I do with these folks other than to say, in a year, we won't be able to. I mean, we have a plan to phase it and not accept new transient rentals, but it will impact that number. I believe we may not be able to contribute that, but we'll see. So all those things come into play, and some of this project eats up over 40 parking spaces to try and accommodate and provide the kiosks that were necessary for the commercial operators, and storage, and some of the other things that I guess I'm a function over form guy. So palm trees and pavers for me aren't as important as the operational stuff, but I understand the importance of it based on the city's vision, historical vision of this. So, yeah, I think, we will have those discussions when it comes time to really fine tune what's really important, what's a necessity, and what's a nicety. Hopefully that helps. I wanted to, like I said, I had, this was my first couple weeks in, I'm like, that's a big number. But when you look at the reasons behind it, the inflation, the contingencies, that accounts for most of it. And I will tell you, interestingly enough, in '05, the initial study was just for the docks in '05, and that was $8 million. And then, the city allocated some funds in 16, 17 from penny money. And then, when you factor in inflation and some of these other things, it's our original number probably was insufficient in 16, 17. But we're working to address those things and having those conversations. I'll be glad to answer any questions if I'm able. If I'm not, I'll punt and follow up.
The last meeting, several of the fishermen and folks that are the commercial people were here, and they expressed some concerns about having space for the fact that the FWC comes in and does, looks at their fish and takes samples or something. I don't remember all the details, and they were concerned there wasn't going to be room for them to operate and things like that. And I'm just curious if that's something that's, staying in the conversations with the engineers to solve that, because I think that could be a big problem.
Well, so it just depends on, and I wasn't here for that.
I understand.
I looked at the minutes, and I think, as I mentioned earlier, everybody has a unique problem that they may have to overcome with this new design. To see 2,000 pounds of fish laid out on our promenade might be problematic. But I will say that I've always found a solution to every problem. It may not be the best one, but I think, I've not seen an FWC or NOAA ramp check where they've dumped everyone's fish out in a big pile on the dock. It may happen, but I don't know. I see a bigger issue with the loss of ice machines, the ability to store equipment adjacent to your vessel. That's what I see as a bigger operational problem than the what if FWC came in and wanted to.
Well, that was just part of it. I mean,
Yeah.
they mentioned a bunch of things. That's just the thing that.
Yeah, no, and
It
I,
all seemed like an issue to me, so.
yeah, and I don't know that there's a solution to a lot of those in terms of an engineered solution, because absent leaving everything alone and staying status quo, you have to address these things. And I would say that I know some of the structures and things are permitted out there. I recognize that. They go way, way back. But ultimately, I don't see a scenario, and I've heard, we've talked about parking and parking garages and things in the past. There's not a definitive plan moving forward for that, but I've heard folks say, well, we'll put, storefronts in the bottom floor. You can't do that anymore. And I think that's the recognition. You can put storage in bottom floors, so potentially down the road there's an opportunity to do that. But I think this will fundamentally change the logistics of a lot of the operations. That's probably the best way to describe it. It's a logistics challenge, and I don't think there's an engineering design challenge because it's not allowable anymore. And that's as frank as I can be about it. I mean, it's not me saying I don't want you to have it. It's me saying that's not allowable. But the only alternative to retain what exists now is to leave it alone. And I don't think that's an option, because it's got to come down, and even if I replace with timber structure along the commercial waterfront, nothing can be on top of it. So it's a problem that I don't think the engineers can engineer out of a rebuild. It's a code problem that you can't engineer around. I think they've been really creative with some of the structures that we're still working on, but those are the kind of things that I think are a real challenge, and there may not be an engineering design solution for if it's not permissible. I hope that helps.
I know this is only my second meeting here, so I might not be aware of several things that other people are aware of.
It's only my first, so
One of them is, who is it that determined what the budget is? How did we come up with that number?
So, generally speaking, capital improvement budgets are planned well in advance. I think what happens a lot of times is that far in advance, if you don't have a design team designing it at the point you set the budget, it's a best guess scenario based on what you think it may be in the future. So it's not until you have a design team and then ultimately a construction manager that comes in and says, well, that number's great, but stainless steel has tripled in price by the time that we have a construction manager involved. So to your point, we've seen that not infrequently within city government. It occurs because these are so far in advance that you're just basically giving it the best assessment you can when you silo this money or allocate it.
So we can't just redefine the budget?
So there may be an opportunity to have that conversation with the city manager and council to say, we may need additional funding, and then we are in a position, because we're an enterprise fund, can we pay that back? What's the payback time on $6,700,000? If I can charge market rate for the recreational slips, and perhaps that's a short timetable. So yes, all those things are in play, and it's a valid point, because I've been involved in several projects over the years, and my philosophy was always, well, give me your best number and let's double it now, because it's always more. Our challenge is we are an enterprise fund, and our revenues, as you see, are trying to pay for some of this, and they're limited. But I can't charge more under the current construct because it's dilapidated.
So can I ask you just a couple things? Based on your comments and based on things we discussed last time, I have a feeling they're changing. Fine, I'm not criticizing that. I'm just wondering if I'm right in making that assumption. So for instance, I think we have 165 slips. The hope was to keep 165. I kind of heard your comments this morning that may or may not be possible. We talked about some elements of design phase being done by early this fall, and then a construction plan by winter, but if now we got to go back and kind of rephase how things even get done, that seems like it's probably up in the air. Am I
Yeah,
right in this
I would
assumption?
say that a couple things, and I mentioned that one of the potential plans is to eliminate an entire dock.
Yes, that's right. You did.
This will be helpful. So this is one of the latest iterations here. The latest iterations, and one of the potential plans, and I don't want to speak in too much detail about it, but one of the potential plans would effectively eliminate this entire dock and phase it in later, which that's revenue from about...
I'm sorry, I missed that. Which one did you point at?
Yeah, this one right here.
Okay.
So if that were the case and you eliminate an entire recreational dock, you eliminate the revenue from 40 slips for a period of time until you phase the project. Would it not be better for me to retain the revenue and then pay back? But those things those are management discussions and council discussions that I think will take place going forward. So that is just one of the potential plans. Some of them are engineering certain features out, reducing features. Unfortunately, you can't cut costs without cutting things. And that's the exercise we're going through to just see if we were to try and stay within the existing budget, what does that structure look like? What impact does it have? So effectively, we would lose about 40 recreational slips until we phased it in at a later date. Phasing in gives me a little pause, just based on my experience, but if we can generate revenue, if we rebuild the rec docks and increase the rates to whatever the market rate might be, certainly there's the potential to pay that back. But those are all different discussions. I think the next, discussion will probably be initiated when we get the design team before council and have those higher level conversations with council members to see what their desire is. I have seen, several projects that we've slowed down or pumped the brakes on just because of the costs and the volatility in the materials and supply and demand and those kind of things. We met with Duke Energy the other day, and they are, what was it, 6 months out on transformers? 6 to 9 months out on transformers in some instances. So it's impactful.
I had a question about you gave the analogy of the bathroom being on the second floor. You can't build anything, yet there's new hotels on Clearwater Beach that have lobbies. They're not lobbies with check-in desks, but there are air-conditioned lobbies that you walk into from the ground level, and the elevators are there. There's couches and there's places to sit, and it's habitable, so to speak. So, I question if there's not some way to get around that requirement to have absolutely nothing on below the floodplain
Right.
constructed.
And I can only defer to the permitters and planners in that space, because that's certainly not my
That's not
role.
you, but
But-
maybe some way to get around some of that, because it's being done right now. I mean,
Right.
Two hotels just opened up and they have ground floor air-conditioned spaces.
Yeah, and that's definitely worthy of conversation, because that's just not what I do. I'm just relying on what I'm being told by those folks that do that, building, permitting, and then the engineers. So it's an interplay between the engineers and permitting and building, and the engineer wants to do something, then they're told no, and then they have to come back and say, well, why can't we do that? And then they try and see if there's a flexibility, like what we call it here in Clearwater, if there's flexibility opportunities there. So, yeah, I mean, that's definitely worthy of conversation, because I don't know the answer to it.
At one point, there was the ability to put plates in slots to keep the interior of that dry during a storm surge.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's going away or not, but I'm just saying, you might want to, as we're looking at different ways to do things, you may want to explore some, creative approaches to
Oh, yeah.
around some of that.
I will say creativity is really been a hallmark of the team, because we were out there trying to figure out where to put a locomotive-sized bunch of electrical equipment, and that's a challenge.
The other question is, one of the possibilities for phasing would be to leave the west end of the Marina alone, I think. What happens with our problem with the seawall and the power and all that in that section, if that would be the approach?
So, we've looked at that. Do we leave this segment alone? Do we remove a wrecked dock? I mean, so we've looked at several different iterations, several different opportunities. The problem is you can't leave that seawall alone because of the utilities that we have to access behind it. And I think that, and then they have to put tiebacks in. And again, this is a temporary fix for the seawall. The ultimate plan and the ultimate phasing will be to put a new seawall in a couple feet seaward of the existing one. That's going to happen, but the team felt that if they can attack the seawall, shore it up, put some anchors behind it, and then attack the utilities, but they have to remove all that dock to get to it, and that's the problem. So anything that would leave something intact, the city would insist on an inspection of that component to make sure that it's safe to leave it alone for several more years, perhaps. So that's some of the challenges.
So, dumb question, and again, this is only my second meeting too, so maybe some of these things were discussed. I don't know what the seawall project entails right off. I've owned waterfront property with seawall, so I have a little bit of an understanding of it, but why wouldn't we tackle that first? I mean, it seems like we're doing things in the wrong order, and I'm sure you have an answer.
Yeah, I do.
But that in itself doesn't necessarily say we're going to cost the taxpayers more money doing things in the wrong order in the long term, and
I wish I had, let me see if I
it
got
just seems to me that
The challenge you have with that is all the commercial docks are affixed to the seawall. So they got to go away to fix the seawall. So visualize this. Let me see if I got a photo that's helpful. The best way to describe it is the commercial docks mirror the seawall and run.
I've been down there.
So they parallel the seawall. So you'd have to rip all those out to access the seawall.
Well, if you were gonna do it all at one time, yeah.
Yeah. So, and then when you start talking about phasing, the mobilization costs, demobilization costs, all these things have the potential to increase the cost dramatically. But yeah, so to access any component of that seawall, all those docks have to come out. So again, we're still going through the exercise with the planning team, so I don't want to be non-committal to anything because we don't know where we're going to go with it. But we have 3 potential phased approaches, some of which leave some of that alone for a period of time. We don't know if that's doable based on the utilities. Do we leave, the utilities intact on half the marina and then address them on the other? I don't know. And I don't know what the best approach is. But that's what, engineering teams are for, and they can tell us what we can and can't do. But anything that would leave existing structures intact, we would have to spend additional monies to have it thoroughly evaluated. A piling out there from over 40 years ago is probably in really rough shape.
You mentioned a couple times going to the city council eventually with whatever designs, maybe request for more money, whatever. Is that still months away, though? I gotta believe.
I'll know more meeting with the city manager on the 14th, and just because there was a provision in the design team's contract that they do a proposal to council. Generally speaking, these projects go at the 30% because you've got a good idea of what it looks like, and then they can present that to council on the potential cost. So we'll see. I haven't agended it yet because I'm waiting for guidance to figure out where the timing of these things. We're kind of constrained. I think we got a single meeting in July perhaps with council, so it creates some challenges when you have those single meeting months.
And my last question was, in the last meeting, we had a lot of discussion about Phil's participation in these discussions on an ongoing basis as the ex officio member of the board, and Kevin's participation in some of these
Sure.
future discussions. Is all that happening, or has it not been appropriate for it to happen yet, or what?
I can speak to it. So I've spoken to the clerk, and I want to make sure that you guys are insulated from any sunshine law questions. And having a board member participate in something that the other board members don't have the same opportunity to participate in is problematic. So I will say that, that's where we are with this. I mean, I even thought, do I find a representative that's not affiliated with this board or council from the commercial fleet to speak on behalf? But what I'm finding is everyone's got a different opinion. I don't have that unified approach to it. So I'm still working, on a strategy to have that engagement and participation because I think it's important, but I want to make sure that it's appropriate and I don't, you guys don't run afoul of sunshine law stuff. So I've had those conversations with the clerk.
Basically saying that if I went to that meeting, that I would be getting prior knowledge that you people weren't privileged of, and technically wouldn't be able to share it with you, except maybe at this meeting, but it would just be, if you read that sunshine law, which was in the paperwork when you joined the board, you're stepping right on it. It's a good thought that we don't, I think the goal was not to waste the designers or Eric's time with upgrading us where one of us could do that. And that's exactly what the sunshine laws don't allow.
So
There is one difference, and that's what I brought up in the past, is I'm an ex officio, I'm not a voting member of this board, and therefore I am exempt from the sunshine laws, and I can meet with the director or anybody about the subject without
No?
any grief.
No, you're a member of the board. You're covered by
I'm a non-voting member of the board.
You're still covered by the sunshine law, according to the city clerk.
Okay.
no,
Okay.
I will tell you guys that some of you have met me. I'm very open to dialogue and communication, and I said this at the Air Park Advisory Board. This environment fee is challenging because it's constrained. and you guys can't communicate amongst one another, and it creates some challenges when it comes to these things. There's, legitimate reasons why it is the way it is, but for me, I'm a much more one-on-one, casual kind of conversation, and I get ideas that way, and it's helpful to a guy like me. But I will share anything I can possibly share during the course of these meetings. I'm still looking at some kind of mechanism to engage a representative from the commercial interest and perhaps even the rec interest, but I don't know the mechanism to do that. As long as it's not a board member, but then how do we identify somebody? And I've already seen conflicts between our tenants. So, I'm sure immediately upon selection, someone would be critiqued for not having the interests of somebody else in mind. So it's a challenge. But all I can do is be as candid as possible when we have these conversations. I think that's, the best approach. And then you have the information you need, and then council, by way of our minutes and our meetings, has access to that.
Okay,
All right.
I guess that concludes that item. Our next item on the agenda is director's report. I'm not sure what left for you to report
So
after all
I've
that.
really retreaded a lot of ground. I don't have specifically a director's report other than what I've already reported, so I broke it out because I thought those topics were important to break out. Unless Mike has something additional that he wants to add, the old business, I think it would be meaningful to everybody as it pertains to the wake zones.
It's not on the agenda, so it would go under director's report.
Old business?
No, it's not on the agenda,
Oh, okay.
so it would be under
Okay.
director's.
I'll cover it under the director's report.
Great.
Easy enough. So there's been a lot of discussion, even when I was at the PD, and I'll attack the first one that comes to mind because it was the one that created a lot of attention, Stevenson's Creek. So Stevenson's Creek, it was dredged a few years back. It started to get development and redevelopment, significant redevelopment down by at the mouth of the creek, where it's kind of like a little bayou bay area. And we got complaints when I was at the PD of someone racing up and down there. Those have become more frequent, jet ski incursions, things of that nature. So this goes probably a year and a half back or so. And like I said, I was privy to this at the PD side because we were looking at enforcement angles. And is there something we can do? So the decision was made to pursue the speed zone up there. There was a lot of banter back and forth, and like I said, I was privy to some of it. Oh, we'll just put some signs in, it's really easy. It is not really easy. That was another thing that kind of hit me head on as soon as I opened the door to my office, was this, because I had several calls about it, and I was, again, somewhat familiar. So ultimately, the process involves, think of a community that wants a traffic signal at what they perceive to be a dangerous intersection. So I heard a lot of calls about danger, speeds, someone's going to get seriously hurt here. And I listened. But when you look at the state's process, you can take one of two paths. You can qualify an area based on certain criteria. Visual obstructions, low bridges, narrow bridges, or you can say we've had this much enforcement and this many accidents. Well, a police boat can't get in there. So your enforcement it doesn't happen. It can't get in there. And the frequency with which this occurs makes that it's not a practical exercise, because you can never predict when someone's going to come in there along the coast on a jet ski and fly up the creek, or fly down the creek in the case of a gentleman that lived up there. So ultimately, the enforcement numbers aren't there, nor are the accident numbers. So think of the intersection that FDOT wants crash data from, and to decide whether they put in a traffic light. The state is much the same way with the waterways. Although they're within our jurisdiction, because they're navigable waterways, they fall under the state's authorization for any kind of ordinance in action. So for us to enact an ordinance, we've got to get approval from the state. That approval, we had to, number one, qualify it not based on data from accidents and enforcement, but on locations of bridges, limited sight distances, width of the creek, and things like that. So we worked with engineering. They did a number of legal descriptions for the purposes of crafting an ordinance, and then worked with legal, and then sent engineering back out and had to survey to actually, I can tell you that that bridge isn't 25 feet high, and I can tell you that it's narrower than, 100 feet. I can tell you that visually, but we have to have numbers. So they had to go back out there and measure all the bridges, and I'll show you what ultimately happened. We met with a gentleman with FWC up in Tallahassee, virtually, of course, and ultimately our proposal involved the entirety of Stevenson's Creek. Made sense to me as a voter that it's narrow, limited sight distances, multiple bridges, pedestrian bridge. Can we get the entirety of Stevenson Creek covered under this wake zone? It made sense to me. I found quickly that they have to interpret your request based on the letter of the law. And I'll show you what we ended up with, and this will be our proposal or something very similar to it. So, the law allows, all those bridges qualify, but it only allows you to regulate within 300 feet of each structure. So my vision of the entirety of Stevenson Creek covered under a no-wake zone is not practical under the letter of the law. So as a voter, and there's no point in arguing some things that are specified in law, because as a voter, I don't see myself idling through one bridge, hitting the gas, getting on plane for 150 more feet, coming off the gas, idling, getting on the gas. It just doesn't make sense from a practical vessel operation. But what they allowed is 300 feet from each bridge, plus the entirety of the narrow area of the creek, which is less than 75 feet wide. So that's the best we can do in our application, and that's the best we can hope for an ordinance at this point in time. I heard through the grapevine that they may be reconsidering some of these distances in the future and the width of the waterway, because, as we know, boating is taking off in Florida, and there's jet skis and vessels in every waterway and creek known to man. So it wasn't what we had hoped for, but ultimately it's better than nothing, and it addresses some of the issues we were having there. And if the safety concern, you can see why you can see the limited distances around those bridges, the inability to see and go flying through there makes no sense. So I think it's a step in the right direction. I'm hopeful that we can get that enumerated in an ordinance and get it before council.
If I could throw in there, especially for our newer members, and correct me if I'm wrong, but Clearwater has more restricted speed zones than any other municipality in the state of Florida. So adding to that also makes it, if I believe, also makes it difficult. But you have to say, oh, well, we just make it a speed. No, there's signage, there's maintenance of those signage, there's considerable costs that go along with every time you designate one of those.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons for that is because we have so much waterfront property that's been
Yes.
built up, like Islands Estates and things like that. That's part of the reason that, because I do boating, I boat all over the place. But, so, so when you're aware, I live right here on the creek. That's,
Okay.
and my wife was one of the people calling you guys,
Okay.
because the guy that was screaming down the creek
Sure.
was gonna kill somebody.
Yeah.
He hasn't been using his boat lately, thank God, but one of the things I want to mention is, manatee are in this creek constantly, and at the last meeting, I think I mentioned that, is there a way to use the fact that this creek is filled with manatees a lot of the year? I mean, they're up and down, I see them go right by my dock all the time, literally all the time. Dolphins also, but I don't think they're protected the same way, but Is there not a way to,
This, when we looked at all this, this was the most direct and appropriate approach to do this. I mean, if there was an easier way to have done it,
Yeah.
I would have done it. So I don't see that. I mean, this has taken hundreds of man-hours and surveys, and, I mean, this is not an easy
yeah,
task.
I'm sure it wasn't trivial.
So, and I think where this comes from, and to your point, Mr. Laughlin, a lot of this stuff was grandfathered in, and it was at a time when you could regulate your own waterways and just put signs in wherever you needed to, right? And then the state stepped in and said, no, these are state waters, they're effectively navigable waterways. So the manatee problem, I mean, unfortunately, the manatee vessel conflict is going to continue to get worse throughout this state because of the number of vessels.
Yeah.
But I didn't see that and don't see that as the best approach to this. I mean, this is the best we could do with what we were working with.
I mean, honestly, the bike bridge is the biggest issue because
Yeah.
it's short,
Sure.
it's very narrow, and as you go through it, you can't see what's coming the other way. And
No, it's messy. And again, I mean, I think this effectively should address the safety concerns because you're idling in the obstructed visual areas. I mean, and that was what was presented over and over again, safety, safety, safety.
yeah, this would get the lion's share of the issue, I think.
So, that's what we could do. And again, this isn't a done deal yet. It still has to go up to Tallahassee officially as an application. They have to give us authorization, then it has to come back for council action as an ordinance. So the belief that you just put a few signs in, because I've heard that a couple times. Why don't you just put some signs on? Trust me, I know all I need to know now about minimum wake zones. Unfortunately, too much.
And why was minimum wake versus slow speed no wake chosen? Because
Because it's specified in the statute on how to address it.
it is, okay.
Yeah. So that brings me to another one, and this is the other area that we were asked to review. And it's the orange area specified, and the rationale behind that area was to make it consistent with essentially the rest of the waterways out there. And the argument was that, and the statute specifies that if you have a marina with launching and retrieving capabilities or fueling capabilities, you can set a 300-foot distance from there. So we kind of took it a step further and said, well, we have it makes no sense to have this circle extending 300 feet from the Clearwater Yacht Club and then have the rest of it as a full wake zone. And then we also have a lot of cut-throughs that go through the grass flats to intercept the channel to Clearwater Pass. So that was our first kind of idea. It came back subsequent to our meeting from Tallahassee that the best we could do is this exclusion zone around Clearwater Yacht Club. But the statute doesn't provide for it because the yacht club does not cater to the general public. Yacht clubs are specifically excluded because they're for their membership. So that's the response we got. So that's a non-starter for that area. Cannot get a wake zone in there. It doesn't meet the, again, black and white criteria specified in statute. And if you want, for reference, the statute's 327.46. 327.46. It's all enumerated in there, and you'll see the specifics of it. But again, the state reviews it. They look at the letter of the law, and this is what it says, and this is what you can get. And their interpretation of yacht clubs is that they're private clubs for their membership. So we tried.
Isn't there still a minimum, I was thinking in Clearwater, there's some minimum like 50 feet from all docks at this point. They did that some years back, like all the way around the Island Estates. You showed it here, the yellow around Island.
Yeah, so Island Estates is 75,
Or 75, some
75
distance.
yards, 75 yards out. So when you look at Island Estates, some of those are all slow speed zones, anything within that yellow. And then if you look at the east end of Island Estates, those buoys are 75 yards out. So that's actually codified in the ordinance.
But that still applies where the orange area you're showing also,
No.
or it doesn't? Oh.
No. So it has to be, when you see an ordinance that refers to a wake zone, it'll have coordinates, and that's the exact area covered by that. And then it'll say, or, bounded by this lat lawn and this one, and then we'll say, and within 75 yards of whatever.
Gotcha.
So it's very specific. And that's why we had to get a legal description for all these things. So when we make the application, they know exactly what we're talking about. So the engineering team had to get legal descriptions for all these things. So,
Right.
and yeah, they're tired of my requests already, because we had to keep coming back and say, okay, well, what about this? Because initially it was all of Stevenson Creek, so they did a legal for the whole creek, only to come back and have to do these unique legal descriptions for 300 feet radius from each bridge. That's much more complicated. I was hopeful I could just put in some buoys, some signs. Not the way things work. So that concludes my director's report. I think hopefully I've touched all the bases. I'm sure as soon as we leave, I'll remember something I wanted to mention, but hopefully that covers it. Anybody else have any more questions?
I had a couple,
Yeah.
quick questions. I remember in the old director's report, the wholesale fuel costs going up quite a bit. I can't imagine that slowed down.
You know what, I'll let Mike talk to that. Mike is constantly dealing with that. The volatility is crazy, but I think it'd be helpful if Mike speak to that one.
So, last year, May, especially 2020, I could buy diesel fuel for 76 cents a gallon. So, I came across and I wanted to compete, plus help out the commercial tenants with, them going off-site to collect fuel and everything. So, our markup was 30%. Well, now we're in the market that we're in now, and 30%, they'd be paying more than what the regular payment is. So I've got it marked at about 50 cents, at 50 cents above my cost. The problem is that the cost changes daily, and I don't get those invoices. So there's been a couple of days where I actually sold fuel to the commercial tenants for less than I purchased the fuel, which is fine because we're talking hundreds of dollars, not a whole lot. But just playing that balancing act right now, it's very volatile, and the gas is what we're seeing a big rise in right now. Diesel's starting to come back. Diesel for about 2 weeks dropped off quite a bit. Now it's back on the rise, but fuel's just seems like incrementally rising more.
What's today's diesel?
I don't know. It's still 463. I haven't changed it yet, but I'm waiting on invoices for the commercial and at 578 for just the retail sale.
Thanks for taking the fixed increase approach or the fixed
Yeah.
approach as opposed to percentage, because,
Yeah, I mean, I want to compete. I don't like you guys having to go off-site to get fuel, and I understand why you do, because when you're talking about the amount of fuel that you're getting, you're talking about savings of $500. So,
we stick with it, but
yeah, so I try to accommodate that to capture some of that. So,
I mentioned at one point, letting those operators that are going off-site, exit fuel from a truck that's controlled by the city. In other words, you order what you want for Tuesday morning and the truck will be there dark early, and it'll pump directly to your boat, and the city still gets their profit out of it without going through all your equipment.
yeah, I mean, there's a lot that, went into this last contract that we have with Palmdale. So we'll look at, in another year or two when this contract's up, we'll look at some other things. A lot of pride that we have in our fuel is we have really good fuel. We attribute a lot of that to that valve tech. They got the anti-algae, the herbicide, things in it. We're very meticulous about my fuel, water in the fuel, everything else. So that valve tech is something that, we support, and we're proud of it. It's good fuel.
John's Pass, the Hubbards have a fuel tank there, and they get a full truckload, and then we would only be getting a smaller load, and whatever that load would be to truck it in, that's what Hubbard's charges us. What it would cost us if we got a truck on its own. He still makes money on it because he gets a better price.
Yeah,
And that keeps me at the dock getting fuel there, and he makes something. I get the same price at what everybody wins.
yeah.
I don't have to go somewhere else to get
But
it.
we're also bound by ordinance too, of where we can fuel. So, that's another hiccup.
Guys just stick around and buy fuel from me instead of going somewhere else.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear
Just
you.
trying to get those guys to stick around and buy fuel.
Sure, sure. Sure. Any other questions?
I had a question about our revenue sources. So I hear that fuel is one of them. Tenants paying for their slips is another one.
Yeah, I mean, it's relatively straightforward. It's slip rentals, fuel, some ancillary stuff, ice, and then leases from some of our businesses. So those are the sources. It's very similar to the air park. It's slip rental or rentals and fuel.
Has there been any discussion about diversifying or adding to those or anything like that? What comes to mind for me is we had the boat races here for a couple of years, and it seems like that's an independent organization that puts on the races here. So that could possibly be a partnership that we could look at. And I'm thinking about this because if we need an extra $6 million for the Marina project, we need to be thinking about all of our revenue sources or opportunities to collaborate so that we aren't lifting that burden on our own, it sounds like.
Yeah, I think, anytime when you look at those public-private partnerships, I don't know, I mean, the boat race is probably not a great example because I don't know that I don't know how you would monetize that from the city's perspective. We're essentially would be sponsoring and supporting, so I don't know, other than, trying to calculate what the economic impact to the Clearwater. So I don't know that you could effectively monetize that to us. I just don't, having been around those and seen how they operate, I think, the city is contributing a lot of in-kind type services to those events. I would say, we've talked about parking structures, parking garages. That's merely kind of conceptual at this point. Nothing's moved forward there, but is there a potential to generate revenue that's, if it's Marina specific, through that, a parking structure that goes into because they're coming to the Marine and Aviation's Marina, the city's Marina. So I think there's potential there. The leases were really built out there as it stands, but if you were to put a multi-level parking structure out there, could you put restaurants on top or things like that? So, we've thought about those, but we're so involved in the day-to-day operations and the variety of these projects right now that hasn't been sort of on our radar.
Having helped put together a budget for what was the initial flagship Niagara offshore powerboat run in Erie, Pennsylvania, right before I moved down here, there's not a lot of money there. By the time the prize money, by the time the insurance, by the time you pay all the bills, you're saying maybe if we just raise the entry fee a little bit, we'll cover all this. If nothing goes, it was I was involved the first 2 years, and everything was like something's going to go wrong, and we're going to lose $1,000. Is that okay? Because there was not a lot of revenue in it.
I think probably the best way to, maximize profitability, if you will, is prop up a high-end, really nice facility, and the demand is there for those high-end rec slips, and they'll be there. Unless we have something catastrophic in the market, another significant recession, but we get calls all day long. Do you have a slip? Do you have a slip? Do you have a slip? And I think if you offered something that's not what we have now, you could charge those rates and you will fill those slips.
Was there any pushback on the rate increases in May for the?
A little bit. I mean, it's never well received when anyone gets a rate increase, of course. But like I said earlier, my intent in the future is to give that plenty of advance notice so no one's caught off guard. I did get one, and I had a good conversation with somebody, but it was nominal. It was at the lower end of the rate increase, and it was a rec slip, and they've had it for a long time. So I looked at it, and I think the increase, I mean, but this was made to be really difficult, and I can't believe you've done this. How could this be? And it was like $30 a month increase, $28. I mean, it was. I don't know. I mean, so it's all about perspective. Everyone has a different perspective. So those are sensitive things, and I would tell you, and you know, when this marina is under construction and we're going through all these, our plan is to not have any increases during those periods. I think once we're done, the marina is complete, you'll see incremental adjustments until we get to market rate, whatever that is at the time. I think that's prudent. That's a way to repay the investment. I wouldn't want to go overnight and go from, you know, $13 a foot to 19. That's a significant impact. So you would have to phase that in and have an inflationary component phased in as well, because that's what we're all dealing with right now. I mean, I've had some you know, commercial lease increases that were tied to CPI and things like that, and that's significant right now. So I think we have to be sensitive to it. You know, as you guys know, we didn't do any increase for the harbor because they're dealing with Imagine and all the dirt, dust, and inconvenience of trying to get to their vessels.
Okay, thank you again, Eric.
Sure.
Are there any other comment areas that any of the board members wish to ask or bring up? In that case, I think we are ready to adjourn.
I'll move we adjourn.
Thank you.
I'd like to second that.
Seconded. We're adjourned.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good job.